What's up, guys?
What's up, guys? I'm telling you why I went to prison.
Prison talk. Oh my gosh, let me tell you about my prison time. All the
I
PPs.
dropped that soap so hard. I do have a question.
Sure.
Do you have to actually watch out if you drop the soap? Like, is that like actually like a
Not
thing?
the one I went to.
Did you enjoy dropping the soap?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like, is that like really like a thing that you have to look out for? Like, dudes like sexually harassing people?
Not the one I was at. You got the little girly boys that are there for that purpose. So.
Oh, cute.
Yeah. There's guys that are willing, so you don't have to.
Oh, okay.
Don't have to worry about getting raped. I'm sure some prisons.
Well, it's not rape if they can't say no.
Not in the one I was at. All right, so today I am going to talk about the reason I went to prison, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring up my prison past was because I've got a lot of good stories and things that I think people could learn from with the prison experience. I'm sure people have questions too about what life is like inside a federal prison. A lot of other people want to try to tell my story for me from what they see from like a news report. But come on, guys. I think we all know that can't really trust what the cops say or what the news says half the time.
Information that was false and fake and never happened got released to the public.
So I'm going to tell the story so that some of you out there don't have to keep doing it for me, okay? First of all, you need to know the difference between a jail and a prison. Jail is more like county, state type stuff. Jail can be used to describe a place for those awaiting trial or being held for minor crimes, whereas prison describes a place for convicted criminals of serious crimes, aka felons like myself. We go to actual prisons versus jail. So anyway, that's clear that up in the first place. Number two, let's go ahead while we're doing definitions and a definition of a conspiracy. The justice system and criminal law, conspiracy is an agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime at some time in the future. One thing to note about conspiracies is you don't even have to actually do the crime. If you know about the crime or if you plan the crime, my lawyer actually put it to me this way. You can say, hey guys, let's go rob a bank. You have guns. They end up being toy guns. You never even make it to the bank, but on the way there you get pulled over by a cop, and the cop says, what are you doing? And one of the guys goes, we were going to rob a bank. At that time, you would all be guilty of conspiracy of bank robbery, even if you didn't have real weapons. Just if you discussed it, even if it was a joke, you would actually all serve time as if you robbed a bank, even if you didn't. That's how conspiracy laws work, and a lot of times it's kind of a gray area used to, well, basically get people arrested when they have nothing else on you. So, now that we have the definitions out of the way, let's roll back about, was it 10 years ago? 8 years ago. I gotta look myself up and see when I actually committed the crime. April of 2012. Yeah, so years ago I ended up actually serving 9 months in prison for conspiracy to violate housing rights, conspiracy to infringe on housing rights, and they actually originally tried to tack a third one on that carried a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence, which basically means that no matter what, you're going to get that sentence. There is no lower sentence. So 10-year mandatory minimum sentence of felony use of fire. So this is the story about how all that went down. All right, so anyway, back in April of 2012, I was at my house in Tennessee. My girlfriend at the time and I had gotten in a fight. She had gone to stay with her parents for a few days. Her brother was actually still staying with me. And it was a regular Friday, Saturday night occurrence where I lived for us to have bonfires. We were out in the middle of the country out in Tennessee. We would go get slabs of wood from the wood mill. Anyway, we'd get those in old pallets, diesel fuel, boom, bonfire. Everybody sit around, drink, have a good time, because that's what people do in Tennessee, because there's nothing, and the nearest Walmart's like 40 miles. We're chilling at the house on whatever night it was of the week. We were gonna have a bonfire that evening. And my neighbor comes over, and of course he's been drinking. I had drank like a fifth of Jack. I'm halfway passed out on the couch. We're supposed to be having a bonfire. I was waiting for them to get everything. Rusty is the name of my girlfriend at the time's brother. Tim was the other conspirator, my neighbor at the time. We had been drinking a little bit and stuff. So he comes over, he's all mad. This guy had been selling his younger brother drugs, and apparently he tried to go to the local sheriff about it. Of course, they wouldn't do anything, because apparently the sheriff's or chief's or whoever's nephew was also one of the local drug dealers, and he's like, well, I know what's going to get him. I know what'll fix him up. And we're like, what? And he's like, I'm going to go burn a cross in his yard. And I was like, well, that's a little old school. Yeah, whatever, man. I go back to sleep. And actually in the statements they said I was passed out on the couch when most of this went on. So they wake me up a little while later. Rusty had gone over there to his house, and they show up at my house. They had built this little cross that was like 4 foot tall out of some 2x4s. So they come to the house, they've got the cross in the back of the pickup truck, and I'm like telling them, you know, hey, I don't want anything to do with this. I had been associated before, just like I mentioned in my previous video. And of course they pulled the, you know, oh, you know, you're a pussy, oh, you're gonna snitch if you don't go with us, things like that. And I'm like, well, I'm not a snitch. So, oh, well, come on, at least ride with us. I was like, you know what? I was thinking, all right, if something happens to Rusty, then, well, his sister would kill me. And I was like, I know that they're probably going to get in trouble, but screw it. Like, I'm not going to just sit here and let them think that I'm going to call the cops on them. So I told him, I was like, I'll ride in the truck. I'm not touching it. I'm not touching anything. I'll sit in the truck. So I hopped in the back of the truck. They loaded it up. I'm sitting there like, hey, don't get this on me. You know, they had poured diesel fuel on the thing. One of the things they got me for was because earlier in that day, the neighbor had purchased diesel fuel for the bonfire with my card. They pulled proof that it wasn't me and that it was like way earlier in the day before this was ever conspired when he went and bought the diesel fuel using my card. And they verified through statements between Rusty and himself that, you know, they said, why were you buying diesel fuel? Well, we bought it for the bonfire every week, plus I had a diesel truck, so I had a dedicated jug to diesel fuel. And they pulled camera video and stuff from the store showing that I wasn't with them. And then we proved that he actually had one of my cards that he used on a daily basis because my neighbor was also a construction guy and he was the one remodeling my house. So they verified that he often used my card to buy materials, to buy stuff from the store, to get himself beer or whatever like that, you know, when he was working. So we got all that proven, but that was something they tried to throw in the mix and say that, you know, oh, well, it was bought with my card. Anyway, nixed that out the window that way. So anyway, we ride out down this back road to this, well, I would say we rode to a house. There wasn't even a house there. We drive by some houses. We stop. There's like a gravel driveway. Apparently, the guy, it was a black guy, him, and then there was like 4 white people that lived in this trailer that was like 100 yards off the road. It was apparently owned by some lady in a house next door. So anyway, he gets out of the truck. You know, per the statement, he exited the truck. He set it up. And then this is where they got me in more trouble later on because he put it in the yard and there was a tree and everything there. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm going to do it here. I said, get that crap out of the yard. Just leave it in the road. Let's go. Later, when I talked to the FBI, this is actually what incriminated me because I admitted that I told him, get it out of the yard, leave it in the street, and let's go. They said, oh, so you told him to put it in the road. And I'm like, well, no, I didn't want him burning the yard. It was under a tree. I was like, duh. Okay. That was instruction. I was like, you know what, fine, I'll take that. Yeah, sure. I told him to put it in the street. So of course, you know, they're writing it down. Oh, well, he put this in the street, or he told them where to put it. And I'm like, look, if you're doing something stupid, don't hurt anybody, don't destroy any property. If the worst you're gonna do is burn a couple of 2x4s in the middle of the road, I mean, don't burn someone's yard down. And that's honestly the way I felt about it. These guys are already probably gonna get in trouble. I was like, I ain't have anything to do with it. I don't want anybody to get hurt or anybody's property to be damaged because of a couple of idiots.
So you said that you didn't want to touch anything, right? Like you didn't want any connection to it.
Right.
Did they have like DNA testing at this time? Could they have connected your DNA?
Yeah, you have to like be in the system. I mean, they can't just take something and be like, oh, this belongs to this person.
I know all that. I didn't know they could do that.
Yeah, it was only like 5 or 10 years ago. So. But no, my main thing was honestly, I was like, it was just personally, I didn't want to. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, like at you.
Because that way they could put me on a lie detector and be like, did you touch it? Did you light it? Did you do? No.
Hell no. No.
No?
Put me on a lie detector. I didn't. And they even put in their statements that, you know, before we left, I was like, guys, this is a terrible idea. You really shouldn't do this crap. They're like, why'd you go with them anyway? I'm like, well, when they're sitting there calling you a snitch and like your next door neighbor, like your redneck next door neighbor is like, oh, what are you gonna do? Tell on me? And like his dad had killed somebody like a few years before down the road and he get in trouble. And I'm like, I ain't getting killed. No, I ain't seen. Okay, you know, to clarify, if somebody was getting hurt or like property was getting damaged or something at that point, I don't know if I was snitched, I would have made more of an effort to stop them. Something stupid like this, I'd rather just not be a snitch on it.
I want you to yawn like that again.
No.
No, tongue out and everything. Hot.
So anyway, I guess I could tell the story of like the whole event and then try to do it in chronological order about what they found out later, but I'm trying to summarize everything so this doesn't turn into a year-long documentary. So anyway, he puts it in the road, lights the thing, we drive off, little 4-foot-tall things burning. I'm like, oh Lord, like, I hope it doesn't burn anything down. So anyway, days go by, of course nothing happens, and then I find out that people are hearing about it. They didn't hear about me being there. Apparently the guys who did it were going around telling people that they did it. And of course, you know, word traveled fast around town. But I'm thinking it wasn't for like a few months before I finally got a call from the sheriff's department. So I'm in the house one day and I get a call from the sheriff's department. They're like, hey, Mr. Flanagan, you've been expecting our call, I guess. And I was like, no, why? What can I do for you? So anyway, he was like, well, it's not so much what you can do for us, it's what we can do for you or whatever. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, can you come in? I got somebody here from the FBI that wants to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. At this time I'm thinking, and again, if you haven't watched my previous video about when we were accused of infiltrating a white supremacist group and banned because the white supremacists said that we were infiltrating the group, which we were. I kind of thought maybe it was something related to that. I was like, oh crap, the feds want to ask more questions about stuff or something. You know, I don't know. Maybe they want to know what happened with that. I was like, all right, cool. I'll go in. So I get up to the sheriff's department and they're talking about this incident with the cross and everything. They're like, I guess, you know, such and such told you that we were going to be talking to you. And I'm like, no. And apparently what it was, they talked to the neighbor, talked to my girlfriend at the time's brother, and already got them to confess to everything. So they're sitting there asking me a bunch of questions. And of course I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then they're like asking me more questions. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Eventually they say certain things that I knew only the conspirators would have known about, and I'm like, oh, well, they already rolled on themselves and they tried to throw me under the bus as well. You know, it's like, well, we know you didn't actually do anything, but we know you were there, and you know, this could be a serious matter. And I'm like, all right, yeah, I was there, so what? And they're like, well, did you see them do this and that? And I'm like, you know, I don't remember, I was drunk that night, but yeah, I was there. And because honestly, that's the way I deal. I mean, if I'm talking to the cops, I'm not one to just sit there and spill everything. Because you never know how they're going to try to spin stuff or do whatever, which eventually is what happened to me. So anyway, they go over the events of the night. Everything seemed to add up pretty good. They were like, well, you know, according to our records, you were previously affiliated with a hate group. And I explained to them, you know, the situation just like I did in my last video about, well, we want to see what it was all about, and that, you know, I'd always had friends of all colors and was kind of wondering what this secret society thing was all about, and, you know, that we got kicked out because they found out, you know, that we're not purebloods or whatever it was they called, and we're mongrels and all this other stuff. And basically I wasn't racist, so they didn't like me being in their racist group. You know, you tell people that, and of course the feds don't want to believe anything you say anyway. Later on, I was actually interviewed by the FBI, and when I tried to explain to them our involvement in that, you know, I told my attorney even, I said, hey, I've got police officers that will back me up on this, the chief, you know, everybody that knew about what was going on previously with that involvement. And basically their thing is they don't take the word of local cops because they think all local cops are corrupt. So the previous immunity that I had had from the police chief didn't make a hill of beans when it involved the feds, which I found out. One of the other things we found out was the people that were at the house apparently weren't even there that night when the event happened. It was the lady who owned the property, who was renting it out, who had contacted the police. And when the police tried to find the people, they couldn't find them. Come to find out, they had warrants out for their arrest. So basically, once the cops got involved, the victims actually fled town. And I think like the mother and daughter might have eventually been heard from, but I know the guy that was there who was actually selling the drugs and stuff to the neighbor. I know at least in 5 years he never showed back up to town. It's one of those things, you know, when there is, when the victim's not there to press the charges, they'll automatically do it. And in this case, because the nature of the crime, of course, it was considered a hate crime, which was a felony, which had to be handled by the feds. The sheriff at the time had told me, he said, hey, if it hadn't become a federal matter because of the new laws, it would have been like $1,000 fine, maybe some probation, something like that. But because of the new laws in place, you know, to protect people, the feds had to get involved in everything like that. So then it turns into this big ordeal. So over the course of the next, I don't know, like year or so, I had the initial talk with the sheriff's department and a federal agent. Then had the federal agents come to my house with like the human rights campaign activist, somebody, and another lady who came to interview me. Sat around, talked for a couple hours, just asking about my past, my upbringing, how do I feel about black people, how do I feel about Mexicans. You know, some of the interesting facts I guess they didn't expect were, you know, like my friend from high school that I spent every day with, my security at my club that I ran, my personal bodyguard at my club. These were all black guys, really good friends of mine. I don't know if they ever actually went and interviewed them. They were supposed to go talk to them. You know, ask what type of environment I was brought up in, and then they ask you things like how you feel about equality, affirmative action. I mean, you know, they're just kind of trying to get an overview of you and see what you're all about. At the same time, of course, you know, they're trying to poke and prod like they're supposed to do, because I mean they're feds. So what do you expect them to do? One interesting thing they found out, and it was funny, it was like they almost tried to hold this against me. When I got married, I actually had a bunch of Mexicans in my wedding, and I had Mexicans as my groomsmen. Yeah, we had like a fiesta afterwards. So it was kind of funny because one of my groomsmen had actually recently been deported because he was illegal. And it was like, oh, so you have illegal Mexican friends? And I'm like, yeah. And then they're like, well, that doesn't sound like somebody that was a white supremacist would do. And I was like, well, I tried to explain to you about that, but you didn't want to listen. You know, and of course then they, oh, well, you know, let's go to the next question. When they found out that I had friends who were illegal immigrants, who I actually went to the police station to try to bail out when one of them got caught. When one of my friends who happened to be black got in a fight, I ended up going to the police station and bailing him out. You know, they had records of all this where I had been involved in helping these people, and were like, well, if you did all this and this, then how were you okay with what happened that night with these guys burning a cross? And I was like, well, I'd never said I was okay with it. I told them it was stupid. And later on in their statements, they even said that I tried to stop them. I told them it was dumb. They wouldn't listen. And that, you know, they were calling me, you know, a pussy and a snitch and all this. And, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, won't kind of thing, or you a bitch if you don't. So I'm like, yeah, I rode in the truck, which I obviously shouldn't have. It was a spur of the moment kind of thing. And, I mean, I'm sure people all over the world have done stuff where you may not be thinking clearly when you do something, or, you know, people say something like that and you're like, fine, I'll ride with you just so you know that I'm not, you know, gonna call the cops on you or something like that.
Or maybe you shouldn't be drunk, stupid.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't be drunk. I never drank much anyway, and it was funny because in the statements that night they did confirm, because Rusty said, he was like, Tim had drank a bottle of Jack Daniels. He doesn't normally do that. And I was like, yep, I don't normally do that. And he even said that they had to wake me up on the couch, and, you know, that I had fallen back asleep when they left. And, you know, because at first they were trying to say that I oversaw this whole event, and then the guy's statement said that I wasn't even over there while they were building this thing. The neighbor also was a carpenter, and, you know, like I said, he was a construction worker. He was the one building my shop for me. I found out later that basically they were trying to act like I was the one that organized everything because I had such little involvement. And that's the problem. And as I get to some stories later about in prison, a lot of the guys I met that were there for conspiracy too, they used the same excuse with them. Someone who would have very little involvement in an illegal activity, they would basically say, oh, well, you must be the one who organized it. You made sure to keep your hands clean of it. And I was like, no, I literally was trying to stay out of it. The only involvement I wanted to have was enough to where they wouldn't think that I was going to go run and rat on them or anything like that. I knew nobody was going to get hurt. Yes, it was wrong. You know, I also found out later from my attorney, I said, man, I knew I never should have got in that truck. And he said it didn't matter if you did or not. And I was like, well, sure it did, because then I wouldn't be in trouble. And he was like, no, conspiracy is just the knowledge. He said that even if they didn't even go do it, or if they did something different, the fact that I was present when they discussed it, 2 or more people, were all guilty anyway. So he said it wouldn't have mattered if I went or not, just the fact that I knew that I didn't sit there and call the police as soon as they left. Over the next few months, I didn't hear anything else out of the feds after they came to my house and talked to me and everything. And then I moved from Tennessee to Florida, started running boats down there, started new things. I said, well, I guess nothing ever came of this mess because they never got a hold of me. And then I ended up in Mississippi, where I live now, and found out they were trying to get a hold of me. So I called the FBI agent. I'm like, what's up? I was like, so is this still going on? And he's like, well, yeah, you know, we need to know if you're going to have a lawyer or not. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I need a lawyer yet. And he's like, well, it's pretty serious. It's up to you, though. And I'm like, all right. I did call a lawyer friend of mine. It was like $5,000 or $10,000 just to get him to handle this case. It was like one of these flat rate things. It was a lot of money, and I was thinking, well, if I'm not going to get in that much trouble, I'm not going to spend $5,000 if I don't know if anything's going to happen. My eyes hurt from the light. You don't have this in prison.
You don't have Fiji water in prison?
I think we had Dasani.
Oh my god.
I know. Like,
that's enough motivation for me not to do anything.
we had Dasani, or it may have been Aquafina.
Oh my god, of course you did.
I had Dr. Peppers and Cokes. I did buy a pair of Air Force Ones. I'll show you in the next video. That's how bougie I was in prison. I could talk for hours about everything, I mean, in between. Fast forward to, I get a call. He says, hey, the FBI agent's like, hey, you know, you haven't got a lawyer or anything yet? I was like, no, I was waiting on a call back, because actually my lawyer, I talked to him about it a little bit, and then he was over in Europe on vacation, and I'm like, you know, I've been waiting to hear back. And he's like, well, you know, you got warrants issued for you now. Try not to get picked up by a local cop. All they're going to know is there's a guy with felonies that's got warrants wanted by the U.S. Marshals. They're going to assume you probably mass murdered some people or built some bombs, and they're not going to know it's a minor thing. Trying to get arrested. And I'm just like,
that's what happened with my dad. Dead. They were like, he's building bombs.
That's how it is, conspiracy. So, of course, at this point, I'm freaking out. The last thing I need to happen is get picked up by the cops and go sit in some jail and have to fly on Con Air all the way to FBI headquarters. I actually contacted my birth mom, who happened to be in Vegas at the time, and I'm like, I have to get to Nashville, Tennessee to FBI headquarters, because apparently they've issued warrants and said if I turn myself in, obviously it's better. The Fed had told me that, you know, all I do is I'll go and do a guilty, not guilty. They'll probably let me go. I mean, I'm not a flight risk or anything. I was like, bet. So, as soon as she gets back from her vacation in Vegas, we take a trip to Nashville. I go to FBI headquarters and turn myself in. And even though I turned myself in, I had to get shackled, I had to get handcuffed, all this junk, you know. And they took me in the room, and I went through. They did the DNA swab, fingerprint test. They gave me a copy of a search warrant that they had actually had from Facebook from, I don't know, like a year or two before, where they had, and it said how many gigabytes of information they had pulled off my Facebook account. So yeah, so Facebook is not safe, guys. Be careful what you talk about on Facebook. Fortunately, everything I had ever messaged or talked about on Facebook was truth, and showed that I had even less incriminating evidence against me than they thought I had to begin with. So they do all that. They book me in. I go sit in a holding cell while I'm waiting to go see the judge so I could say guilty, not guilty. And I'm sitting in there with some big dudes, and we're just hanging out talking. It was kind of interesting actually getting to talk to these guys, because some of them were being transferred from other places and stuff like that. I remember they brought them up paper bags with food, and it was like bologna sandwiches with mayonnaise. And like, there was this really big black dude beside me, and he was really nice to me the whole time. And I told him what I was there for, which they all were like, dude, that's bullshit. Like, it's a conspiracy charge anyway, dude. Like, that means you didn't snitch. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I know it's bad, so sorry. And they're like, we don't care. You ain't a snitch. When you're in the pen, it's not about necessarily what you did, unless you're a chomo or a snitch. And I was like, oh, well, I appreciate that. They're like, yeah, man, it's conspiracy. Like, that means you didn't do shit. That means you didn't rat on somebody. Like, we don't have a problem with that. And I'm like, okay. This big dude, he'd been telling me how hungry he was. Since I had booked myself in, the FBI agent, he'd been pretty nice to me the whole time. He actually went down to the cafeteria and brought me a big turkey sandwich, and it had lettuce and tomatoes and all this fresh deli stuff on it. And it brought me a Dr. Pepper or a Coke or something. But it was like in a big styrofoam box, big fancy thing, had potato chips and all that. So when he brought that to me, I knew the longest I would be there would probably be like an hour or two. So I looked at the dude next to me, and I seen him kind of looking. And I was like, you want this? And he was like, no, man, that's your food. That's your food. I ain't going to touch it. I was like, you're like 3 times my size, and you got a little bologna sandwich? Why don't you eat this? Like, dude, I'm just here for an hour. Like, for real, like, you're talking about you got to fly somewhere and stuff. Like, I feel like you deserve this better than I do. He was really thankful. He's like, man, you sure? I was like, yeah, take it. Everybody's like, yeah, dude. And it was sad, because these guys that they'd been locked up for a while, I guess, they were talking about, man, they ain't seen no lettuce like that. You know, I hadn't seen any tomatoes like that. You don't see no turkey like that. And I was just like, man, I was like, well, here, take it. I was like, anybody want the chips or anything? I was like, I just want the drink. So I gave the guy a sandwich and everything, gave one of the guys my chips and stuff like that, you know, just hanging out, talking to these guys. And that's when I first got my inside view of how things really are in the prison system, and how these guys are that everyone labels as bad people. Talking to some of them, one of them was there because he was part of a bank robbery, and the other one was there because some sort of armed assault. You know, one of them The only reason he was there was because him and like his cousin and somebody else, they went and robbed this bank. But apparently he was standing outside, and I think he didn't even have a gun on him from what he was telling me, but the other guys did. They still got him with conspiracy of armed robbery because he was standing outside waiting on them and knew what they were doing, and it was actually his cousin that rolled on him. So I'm telling you, like with these guys, like just not snitching, like that's how you get these conspiracy charges, like that guy. And like it was his cousin, kind of like my situation. It was one of those like, come on man, you gonna snitch on us, blah blah blah. You a bitch if you don't. He's like, fine, I'll be your lookout or something. So he was a lookout. Well, they got him with armed robbery, even though he didn't have a gun, because of what his cousin and the other guy did. And it was because they got caught, and the cops are like, we'll give you less time if you can tell us who the other guy is. So of course he ratted his own cousin out. Something I've noticed outside of prison is I have more white people trying to give me crap and call me a racist because of what happened than I do the black folks. You know why? Because all these black people that are in prison are getting snitched on by family and everybody else. So it means something to them when you got somebody who's willing to stick up for them. And it means something when you're not a snitch. Snitches get stitches, and people who don't snitch get conspiracy charges.
Can you get that tattooed, like, on your chest?
Yes. Non-snitches get conspiracy. I just noticed I'm blinking a lot because it's like, it's midnight. My eyes are tired. Bright light. Do it for the views. Do it for the views. I was going to try this earlier, but we went to Huddle House. So I'm going to conclude part 1. Hang around for the next episode when I talk about going before the judge and I get on supervised release and then the actual trial itself. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Stay out of trouble. Don't go to prison.
Don't commit hate crimes.
Don't get drunk. Don't do hate crimes.